November 20th, 1943. Dawn breaks over Tarawa Atoll like a blood-red wound across the Pacific sky. Vapor ascends from the tropical tree cover where reinforced bunkers and metal artillery positions have converted this coral heaven into a stronghold of destruction. Through a German-manufactured periscope, Rear Admiral K.G. Shibasaki observes the barren skyline from his fortified headquarters bunker 50 feet beneath ground. This battle-tested veteran of innumerable maritime conflicts, now 50 years of age, has dedicated 2 years converting Tarawa into what he designates an unconquerable citadel. The saturated atmosphere within the underground facility holds the scent of petroleum, cement, and the anxious perspiration of 4,800 Japanese soldiers who are convinced they're about to observe American armed forces commit suicide. Turning toward his command personnel, Shibasaki straightens his white military uniform. His tone conveys the assurance of someone who has examined every American beach landing since the Marines deployed in Nicaragua. He proclaims that the Americans could never capture Tarawa with 1 million troops in 100 years, his statement reverberating against the cement barriers. Yet, something appearing on the skyline fails to correspond with the intelligence briefings. Observing through his periscope, Shibasaki notices specks materializing on the water's boundary. These aren't the dispersed, disorganized cargo vessels his intelligence anticipated. These craft advance in flawless arrangement. Their separation too exact, their synchronization too calculated. The dawn illumination discloses profiles that cause his respiration to halt in his windpipe. 535 vessels. Around wireless equipment, his command personnel assemble, their expressions turning ashen as communications pour in from surveillance stations throughout the atoll. "Sir, the adversary armada stretches past optical distance." "Admiral, our reconnaissance tallies 15 flat-top carriers. The arrangement differs from anything in our operational handbooks. Shibasaki has made preparations for American arrogance. He has strategized for their characteristic sequence of hasty, inadequately synchronized shore attacks. His October 1942 combat positioning directive is explicit: delay until the adversary organizes for invasion, then annihilate their congested transports with focused bombardment. However, these vessels aren't clustering together like defenseless targets. They're situating themselves with geometric exactness, establishing intersecting trajectories of firepower that convert the inlet into a unified extermination area with Japanese emplacements as the objective. The noise commences as a murmur, a subdued thunder that pulsates through the coral foundation under Shibasaki's boots. Subsequently, it escalates. The murmur transforms into a thunder that trembles dust from the underground facility roof and vibrates the wireless apparatus. Observing through his periscope, he witnesses cannon flashes blossom like fatal blossoms throughout the American armada. But here's what paralyzes his circulation. The shelling isn't haphazard. Every vessel discharges in succession, generating a cascading surge of devastation that advances across Japanese emplacements with mechanical exactness. What Shibasaki observes in the subsequent 76 hours will torment military leaders for successive generations and compel an entire civilization to discard everything they accepted about combat. The inquiry that will demolish his perspective and reconfigure the Pacific conflict. How is this degree of integration even achievable? You must comprehend what Shibasaki is observing through that viewing device to understand why his limbs begin to shake. For 20 years, he has examined beach landing operations. As a junior lieutenant, he studied the unsuccessful British offensive at Gallipoli, 9 months of disorder because British troops couldn't synchronize their maritime and ground operations. As a leader, he observed Japanese triumphs throughout the Pacific, where personal bravery and exceptional combat determination overwhelmed inadequately synchronized Allied protectors. The Japanese armed forces philosophy that constructed his profession is founded in generations of warrior customs. the conclusive confrontation theory where massed strength and fighter resolve crush the opponent through exceptional willpower and operational surprise. At Pearl Harbor, Japanese synchronization astonished the Americans. In the Philippines, at Singapore, throughout the Dutch East Indies, Japanese troops prevailed because they struck forcefully, rapidly, and synchronized superior to their opponents' expectations. Shibasaki has devoted months preparing Tarawa founded on this verified strategy. His 4,800 protectors inhabit interconnected bunkers engineered to establish crossfire areas that will massacre Americans as they wade ashore in characteristic Western disarray. The cement barriers surrounding him are 3 feet in depth. The metal entrances can endure direct strikes from warship cannons. His artillery weapons are pre-calculated on every conceivable invasion shore. But as dawn illumination reveals the American armada, something fails to correspond with the sequence. "Sir," his transmissions officer announces, tone rigid with bewilderment. "We're obtaining communications from Guadalcanal that fail to correspond with our operational evaluations." Shibasaki rotates from his periscope. "What communications?" Intelligence suggests the Americans accomplished extraordinary synchronization during their August campaign. Our strategists reported being astounded by integration abilities that surpassed all earlier evaluations. The statements suspend in the saturated bunker atmosphere like a condemnation. Shibasaki has rejected these communications as exaggeration from vanquished leaders fabricating justifications. But observing through his periscope, he witnesses American vessels sustain flawless separation while maneuvering in currents that should generate disorder. Provision craft navigate between combat ships without disarray. Flat-top carriers deploy fighter aircraft in synchronized formations that indicate wireless transmission between aviators, vessels, and surface coordinators. This isn't how beach landing operations function. Shibasaki has examined American Armed Forces chronicles. Their Civil War commanders struggled to synchronize telegraph transmissions. Their World War I troops required months of strategizing for elementary trench offensives. Even their victorious operations against Japanese emplacements previously in this conflict demonstrated characteristic Western disarray. Separate divisions conducting independent confrontations with minimal unification. But what he witnesses contradicts everything he comprehends about military supply chains. Through wireless intercepts, his intelligence personnel have been monitoring American arrangements. The magnitude is overwhelming. Operations synchronized throughout 3,500 miles of water, with provision routes extending back to Pearl Harbor and the mainland United States. Shibasaki had determined this was supply chain impossible with current transmission technology and leadership frameworks. Yet, here they stand. Admiral, his artillery leader, reports, American maritime bombardment is modifying founded on reconnaissance aircraft communications. They're rectifying their targeting in immediate time. Immediate time synchronization between vessels and aircraft. Shibasaki has never witnessed anything resembling this degree of unification. Japanese troops synchronize through meticulous pre-strategizing and inflexible leadership frameworks. But Americans seem to be modifying their synchronization as confrontation circumstances transform. The consequences strike him like a tangible impact. If Americans can synchronize provision operations throughout thousands of miles of water, conventional Japanese protective approach becomes outdated. If they can unify maritime bombardment with aerial assistance and surface operations in immediate time, Japanese bunkers transform into extermination chambers rather than protective benefits. Observing through his periscope, Shibasaki witnesses invasion craft advance toward the coral in flawless surges, not the dispersed separate offensive he arranged for. These watercraft sustain exact separations while maritime bombardment ascends and transitions to assist their progression. Combat aircraft bombard Japanese emplacements in synchronized sequences that indicate every aviator comprehends precisely where every other division is positioned. His abdomen tightens as the geometric exactness becomes irrefutable. "Sir," his transmissions officer's tone fractures. Advance witnesses report American troops have wireless transmission between separate invasion craft, assisting combat ships and elevated aircraft. They're synchronizing at the unit degree. Unit degree synchronization with maritime and aerial assistance. Shibasaki has never confronted anything resembling this in 20 years of armed forces duty. But the most frightening comprehension is just commencing to emerge on him. The bunker barriers that symbolize 2 years of building, the interconnected trajectories of bombardment that required months to determine, the artillery emplacements calculated with geometric exactness. All of it was engineered to vanquish the unsynchronized American offensive he anticipated. Instead, he confronts an opponent that synchronizes superior to his personal troops. The noise of American shelling escalates louder, but it's the methodical character of that shelling that causes his circulation to freeze. Every detonation succeeds the previous, in a sequence that indicates every projectile, every explosive, every automatic weapon discharge is component of a consolidated strategy being implemented with mechanical exactness. Through the cement barriers, he can perceive his personal troops shouting in bewilderment and escalating alarm. They prepared to combat American persons. They arranged to vanquish American bravery and exceptional apparatus. They never arranged to combat American synchronization. What occurs subsequently will demolish not merely Shibasaki's protective strategies, but the complete Japanese comprehension of what contemporary combat can transform into when methodical unification substitutes personal heroism. The shelling halts for 30 seconds. An unsettling quietness descends over Tarawa. At his periscope, Shibasaki witnesses invasion craft construct flawless offensive surges in the inlet. Subsequently, the methodical devastation commences. What transpires over the subsequent 76 hours doesn't merely fracture Japanese protective boundaries. It demolishes the essential assumptions of combat itself. "Maritime bombardment resuming, sir," his transmissions officer exclaims over the renewed shelling. But this isn't the haphazard pounding Shibasaki anticipated. American combat ships discharge in succession, generating a cascading bombardment that advances throughout Japanese emplacements like a fatal surge. When the projectiles ascend from one protective area, invasion craft instantly progress toward that identical region. Flawless synchronization, flawless integration. Shibasaki grips his periscope handles until his knuckles become pale. Through the eyepiece, he witnesses American Marines strike the shore not as dispersed persons, but as synchronized divisions with predetermined targets. Wireless antennas on their invasion craft flex and oscillate as technicians sustain constant transmission with vessels, aircraft, and other Marine divisions. "Sir," Bunker 7 communicates direct strikes from maritime bombardment, guided by reconnaissance aircraft. His artillery leader announces. The Americans are modifying their bombardment, founded on immediate time surveillance. Immediate time bombardment modification during beach landing offensive. Shibasaki has never witnessed anything resembling this degree of unification between maritime, aerial, and surface troops. But what causes his torso to constrict with authentic terror is the methodical character of American synchronization. This isn't exceptional firepower overwhelming Japanese emplacements. It's methodical unification that renders Japanese protective approaches outdated. Through wireless intercepts, his transmissions personnel monitor American synchronization in immediate time. Combat aviators communicate Japanese emplacements to maritime bombardment coordinators. Surface reconnaissance personnel request aerial bombardments on particular bunkers. Artillery bombardment ascends exactly as Marine divisions progress, subsequently resumes the instant those divisions relocate to shelter. "Admiral," his intelligence officer's tone trembles. We're intercepting American wireless communication that indicates synchronization descending to separate unit degree. They comprehend where every division is positioned at all instances. Separate unit synchronization with aerial and maritime assistance. The consequences cause Shibasaki's technical preparation to resist against the impossibility of what he's observing, but the proof keeps accumulating. American losses remain surprisingly minimal. Despite intense Japanese opposition, not because Japanese protectors aren't combating courageously, Shibasaki can perceive the frantic confrontation exclamations of his personal troops through the bunker barriers. But American synchronization reduces their vulnerability to protective bombardment while maximizing the productivity of their personal offensives. When Japanese troops mass to repulse one invasion region, American reconnaissance personnel instantly request aerial bombardments on the vulnerable protectors. When Japanese artillery commences bombardment, American counter-bombardment silences those cannons within moments through synchronized maritime bombardment. Every Japanese operational reaction encounters an instant synchronized American counter-reaction. Shibasaki comprehends with escalating terror that his troops are combating separate confrontations while Americans combat one consolidated confrontation. "Sir, critical communication from our Saipan intelligence system," his transmissions officer declares, interpreting from a decoded transmission. Sergeant Teo Yamuchi communicates American synchronization at that position left him too paralyzed to relocate under methodical shelling. The statement strikes Shibasaki like a tangible impact. Yamuchi is a decorated, battle-tested soldier, someone whose bravery has been verified in confrontations throughout the Pacific. If methodical American synchronization can paralyze a fighter like Yamuchi, what does that signify for conventional Japanese combat resolve? Observing through his periscope, Shibasaki witnesses the impossible transform into standard. American invasion craft traverse coral formations with exactness that indicates comprehensive oceanic floor examinations. Provision watercraft materialize precisely when progressing Marines require ammunition and medical provisions. Medical removal helicopters synchronize with surface divisions to extract injured personnel without interrupting operational operations. Every component of American operations functions as component of a consolidated mechanism. Admiral, direct transmission from Lieutenant General Kuribayashi at Iwo Jima, his transmissions officer communicates, holding a wireless receiver. He solicits instant strategic consultation. Shibasaki accepts the receiver with shaking digits. Kuribayashi's tone crackles through interference, but his statements are distinct. "Shibasaki, what we're observing contradicts all operational philosophy. The intensity of the opponent's bombardments are far past description. The capability of the U.S. combat ships and aircraft renders every invasion operation achievable to whatever shore region they prefer." The confession from one of Japan's most esteemed commanders validates Shibasaki's most severe terrors. This isn't confined to Tarawa. American synchronization abilities symbolize a methodical transformation in combat that influences every Pacific confrontation zone. But the mental consequences on Japanese protectors penetrates deeper than operational vanquishing. "Sir, our advance witnesses report American troops utilizing smoke barriers with operational exactness," his artillery leader declares. They're synchronizing smoke deployment with progressing divisions to supply shelter precisely when and where required. Synchronized smoke approaches. Shibasaki has examined military chronicles for generations. He has never confronted methodical unification at this degree of specification. The bunker trembles as American maritime bombardment advances closer to his leadership station. Through the cement barriers, he can perceive the exclamations of his troops, the detonations of ammunition repositories, the grinding noise of American excavation machines clearing shore impediments under sheltering bombardment. But it's not the noise of haphazard devastation. It's the noise of methodical synchronization demolishing Japanese protections, fragment by fragment according to a consolidated strategy. Admiral, lost communications arriving from all areas, his intelligence officer declares, his tone scarcely audible past the shelling. American losses approximately 20%. Our losses, he halts, verifying his calculations. Sir, we're approaching 99% losses in advance emplacements. 20% American losses versus 99% Japanese losses. The calculations of synchronization versus personal bravery. Observing through his periscope, Shibasaki witnesses American technical personnel establish provision repositories under bombardment, while Marines progress past demolished Japanese emplacements. Medical workers treat injured Americans within observation of active confrontation areas. Wireless technicians sustain transmission between divisions despite the disorder of beach landing operations. Every American functions as component of a synchronized mechanism that operates despite separate losses, apparatus breakdowns, and operational obstacles. Japanese protectors combat with mythical bravery. But bravery cannot overcome methodical synchronization. Personal heroism cannot vanquish unified strategizing. Conventional fighter resolve cannot prevail over contemporary methodical combat. As the 76th hour advances, Shibasaki produces his terminal wireless communication to Tokyo. American synchronization abilities surpass all earlier military occurrence. Conventional protective philosophy rendered outdated. Recommend instant strategic examination of all Pacific operations. The communication terminates as American troops overwhelm his leadership bunker. But Shibasaki's demise symbolizes more than the collapse of Tarawa. It designates the instant when conventional combat expires and contemporary synchronized operations are originated. The methodical synchronization that demolishes Shibasaki's unconquerable citadel in 76 hours will compel Japanese strategic philosophy to transform from hostile expansion to frantic attrition. The synchronization approaches that paralyze Sergeant Yamuchi will eventually propel Japanese troops to discard conventional combat completely. What American troops exhibit at Tarawa isn't merely operational excellence. It's a vision of combat's destiny, where unification and synchronization prevail over personal bravery and conventional approaches. The cascade consequences will convert not merely the Pacific conflict, but military philosophy for successive generations. The quietness after Tarawa collapses is more devastating than the 76 hours of synchronized shelling. In interrogation chambers throughout the Pacific, imprisoned Japanese personnel struggled to clarify what they observed. Vice Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa, positioned under severe fluorescent illumination in a U.S. Navy installation, ultimately articulates the statements that torment every Japanese leader. We expressed astonishment at American task group synchronization and intelligence abilities. Their capability to unify aerial, maritime, and surface operations was past our operational comprehension. Past their operational comprehension. These statements from one of Japan's most esteemed maritime leaders symbolize more than military vanquishing. They indicate the expiration of incomplete military ideology. But the personal aftermath penetrates even deeper. Sergeant Teo Yamuchi survives Saipan. But the individual who returns to Japan following the conflict bears minimal resemblance to the assured fighter who once accepted in the dominance of Japanese combat resolve. In post-conflict interviews, he describes synchronization-generated paralysis that left skilled battle-tested soldiers too paralyzed to relocate under methodical American bombardment. We prepared to combat separate Americans, Yamuchi clarifies, his tone scarcely past a murmur. We arranged to overcome their apparatus with our resolve. We never arranged to combat their mechanism. The term captures what Japanese military philosophy failed to foresee. Combat where personal bravery transforms into meaningless because methodical synchronization eliminates the disorder that conventionally permitted heroism to prevail. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi's transformation from assured citadel leader to strategic pragmatist demonstrates this conversion. His terminal transmissions with Tokyo disclose someone whose perspective has been essentially demolished. The United States is the final civilization in the planet we should combat. This isn't merely operational evaluation, it's cultural surrender. The fighter civilization that dominated Japanese military reasoning for generations confesses that methodical American synchronization has rendered conventional confrontation outdated. The strategic cascade consequences reconfigured the complete Pacific conflict. Following Tarawa, Japanese troops completely discarded shorefront protection approaches that had been standard military philosophy for generations. Instead, they established subterranean fortification mechanisms engineered particularly to endure synchronized bombardments. But even these modifications prove inadequate against American unification abilities. Captain Rikihei Inoguchi, accountable for synchronizing kamikaze operations, supplies the most devastating confession in post-conflict interrogations. American synchronization generated excellence impossible to overcome through conventional military techniques. Kamikaze approaches weren't about Japanese extremism or mortality veneration. They symbolized strategic recognition that traditional combat against American synchronization was futile. If Japanese troops couldn't synchronize productively enough to triumph confrontations, they would synchronize to generate maximum mental damage through suicide offensives. The ultimate contradiction. The civilization that astonished the planet with Pearl Harbor's synchronization was compelled to discard synchronized combat because American unification abilities surpassed their personal. But the consequences extend far past World War II. Marine Corps University records disclose how Japanese modification compelled American beach landing philosophy to transform as well. The subterranean fortifications Japanese troops established in reaction to synchronization trauma propelled American unification to even superior degrees of advancement. Contemporary military operations from Desert Storm to current NATO exercises trace their foundations directly to the synchronization innovations that astounded Japanese protectors between 1942 and 1945. The unification techniques that seemed impossible to Shibasaki are now standard operating protocols instructed in militaries worldwide. Samuel Eliot Morrison, the authorized U.S. Navy chronicler, summarizes the conversion. American beach landing synchronization symbolized the most substantial progression in combat unification since the establishment of integrated arms approaches. But the universal instruction transcends military implementations. The Pacific conflict verified that methodical synchronization consistently prevails over personal attempt, regardless of how courageously that attempt is implemented. Japanese protectors at Tarawa, Saipan, and Iwo Jima combated with mythical courage, but methodical American unification rendered personal heroism strategically meaningless. Today's business synchronization, technological unification, and international collaboration all mirror instructions absorbed from the methodical synchronization that traumatized Japanese troops into discarding their complete military ideology. The fighters who commenced the Pacific conflict accepting that combat resolve could overcome any impediment concluded the conflict examining American synchronization techniques they once rejected as impossible. Consider the synchronization obstacles you confront in your personal existence and profession. How frequently do separate attempts fail, not because of inadequate bravery or commitment, but because of insufficient unification with larger mechanisms? What would occur if you implemented the methodical synchronization principles that transform combat to your personal, professional, and personal obstacles? Subscribe for more disclosures about how military innovations persist to configure the method we resolve complex difficulties today. And communicate to me in the responses which component of American synchronization do you consider was most mentally devastating to Japanese protectors, the technical unification, the immediate time modification, or the methodical character that rendered personal heroism meaningless.